Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts podcast. At the Odd Thoughts podcast, we like to talk about the everyday odd thoughts, have conversations on relatable topics, and just discuss whatever comes to mind. My name is Gunther, and I am your host. Today's episode 22, I wanted to talk a little bit about some iconic horror movie locations, at least that are like iconic to me. There's plenty of them, but just wanted to talk about a few of them and then transition into talking a little bit about the afterlife, what happens after death. What is the possibility of maybe a heaven, a hell, reincarnation, all that kind of stuff. And then third, I wanted to talk about nightmares. Staying on the spooky theme, not always pleasant to have nightmares, but what's the difference between, a nightmare and a dream? What tells is going to be a nightmare and what tells is going to be a dream? And then lastly, I wanted to talk about remaking some horror movies. Remaking some movies that I want to kind of personally remake, basically. And then talk about really just mention some good ones, some bad ones. But if you want to listen to any of that, I appreciate you tuning in. Please enjoy. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing okay. I know that the world can be a scary place. A lot happens and it's not always said then how much we can handle. And there's only a certain amount of time we have here on Earth. And we're obviously going to go through a lot of things, a lot of changes, going to have a lot of experiences that define us on who we are. But life is more than just survival. We don't have to just think about making it day to day. We try to find happiness. We try to find the little outlets, things that give us relief and things that make us forget about the mundane or think about the more extremes of life. Little things only ever lead to a better you. Trying to do these little things to make yourself feel better, not just in a way of for the moment, but for the long term. It's only going to lead to a better you. And the more you appreciate the small things that happen and the little whims that happen through the day, it's only going to become better. So keep an open mind. Make sure that you realize that the lessons that come through and the things that you go through are only for better experience to help you know what life is about. Maybe even lead to being a creative person, loving freely, doing these things that you maybe have never thought about before, more comfortable to even do, and always trying to make sure to integrate good things into your life. And remember that we are here to survive, but it doesn't have to be a day to day thing. And the life that we do live is so precious that we need to find those things. We need to make sure that we focus on the good things. And remember that the bad things just make those good things better. But yeah, thank y'all for stopping by. I'm doing okay. I know that we're getting close to Halloween. Was thinking about just all the years of me as a kid. I kind of stopped dressing up for Halloween around like 11 years old and stopped going trick or treating around that age, and I kind of feel lame. I kind of feel kind of feel a little lame for doing that. And now that I have a niece and nephew and they're a little older and they've been old enough to trick or treat, but it just makes it like I want to go. And I'm always a people watcher. So that was always a fun thing as when I was a kid, like to see everybody in these different costumes. Now, I wasn't very creative when I think I was a Power Ranger for multiple years and then a ninja for a couple years. And as a baby, dressed up as probably like a pumpkin one year, right? Yeah, I think I have some photos as a pumpkin and stuff, but I always like loved watching other people's costumes. And people are different minded, right? Sometimes it's like you be a little silly and you dress up as like a funny version of a doctor or like you dress up as this or dress up as that. But then some people really go for it. Some people really like the creepy, scary morbidness. That's kind of a good thing about like Halloween costumes is that you can kind of, just dress up in a little bit of makeup and throw on a couple things and say you're this, and then people just got to kind of believe it. But then you could spend all this money and really feed to the creativity and dress up as some of your favorite characters and some of the iconic horror movie characters or whatever. I always like I just like it's always for me it was always like dressing up on what I loved. And I mean I loved Power Rangers for so many years, so I love that. Thinking about one day what I'm gonna dress my kids in and I don't know. Hopefully maybe they have their own maybe their imagination takes off and it'll be fun to see what they dress up as when they get older. And my niece and nephew, they're getting old enough to like decide their own things and they have their own interests, right? So they dress up as things for Halloween and they have their own ideas. But also candy, right? That was the trick or treating. It was not only people watching, but getting that free candy. I used to love just going to house, and usually there was some similarities, right? There was always going to be maybe Milky Way and Reese's and M&Ms, Smarties. Those are like some of the iconic good Halloween candies. I think I was like I love chocolate, so if I got like a Reese's, some M&Ms, Twix, if I got the Twix, I do wish that I think maybe I'll enact that one day is that I'm just gonna give out full size candy bars. Like none of these fun size bars, these snack size bars. But I used to love the Smarties too. Some of these iconic candies are like when you think of iconic like Halloween candy, it even leads to thinking about like candy corn. And it has its moments for me, but not a love thing, but specifically a Halloween thing. Kind of like maybe it's controversial to say, but candy canes during Christmas. I don't think anybody actually enjoys a candy cane. If you do, then okay, I'm sorry. But you do it because it's Christmas. You know, I eat candy corn because it's Halloween, but it's almost like an excuse just to munch out on candy and, buy just bags of candy and, I'll give out some of it to kids, obviously, but, 'cause it's such a difference now. It's things are different. Cartoons are different and shows are different and kids like different things than when I was younger. I remember when I was a kid, not only Power Rangers was a big thing, but I remember the Scream movies were very popular. So, it was like people in ghost face costume everywhere. They used to scare the hell out of me. The ones that had the bleeding face. Ugh. I remember like going into Spencer's and seeing all the crazy Halloween masks during the time of year and as a kid, it scared the hell out of me. I've always been a jumpy person. I'm a very jumpy person. I'm a scaredy cat, but I love scary things. So I'm not gonna stop being scared. It's not gonna stop me, dude. But I think about going Halloween trick or treating now, and I get more festive. And even with decorations, I love seeing the people's approaches. Some people just put a couple of ghosts in their yard and maybe a light or two, and it's spooky, but it's not anything. But some people, I've seen some yards where, you put the figurines and like the statues, and some actually spooky things, or like you put like a body like laying in the yard or hanging off a tree. It's some people go all out. And like I said, so it's either you take more of a goofy, oh, this is kind of a fun time of year, or you're like really into Halloween, morbidly into Halloween. This is that time of season, so I'm not gonna say anything. If it's March, I might be a little weird if you're decorating your house as Halloween, but I know plenty of people that are like that. So, but yeah, thank you for stopping by, coming to listen to episode 22 with me. Um, the first topic I wanted to talk about iconic horror locations. So let's transition into that. So I wanted to talk about a few iconic horror movie locations. Um, Horror movies usually, I suppose, are kind of more about like the characters or the villain or monster or whatever killer is in the movie or whatever. But quite often, I think like a lot of horror movies are just as ingrained with like an iconic location or some sort of like iconic set pieces or whatever it may be. And so for this topic, I kind of wanted to talk about, at least in my opinion, just five of the most iconic horror movie locations. There are tons out there. There are plenty of horror movies to enjoy, but I figured that I could think of at least five that are significant to me, at least. So I got them kind of ranked from like, not worst to first, but like, from what I feel is the least iconic to my mind to the most iconic in my mind. Talk about maybe some of the scariness and the significance and just give a little love to these films. So for the first place or the first kind of movie I had was from The Ring. I think it's pronounced the Moesco, right? I forget how it's pronounced, but it's the lighthouse in The Ring. It's like you see it in the in the videotape. It's where like the mom like dives off the cliff and kills herself, right? And just always this iconic thing, and especially like growing up, The Ring was a very scary movie to me, and just the whole like idea of this videotape that, you watch it and it kills you in 7 days. That was pretty unsettling as a kid, for sure. But a lot of stuff stood out about that movie. It was a sad story too, kind of, trouble in a family and this mom and dad that that had a daughter that was evil, that kind of had this, that they didn't know how to handle her or whatever, and pushed her down a well. I guess that works. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at that. But that movie had Naomi Watts in it, right? Brian Cox is the dad. So just iconic. It's just a great movie. But The Lighthouse, like I said, it shows up in the videotape. It shows up through the movie, and the actual lighthouse isn't actually called Moesco Island Lighthouse. I'm sorry if I keep messing it up. I haven't watched them. I should have like figured out how to pronounce it, I suppose. But the real name for the lighthouse is Yaquina Headlights, out in Newport, Oregon. So if you ever want to go visit it, it's out in Newport, Oregon. Apparently it was resurrected or like, built. I don't know if it was like I was reading and it said it was established in 1873. I didn't see if it was like cuz I feel like you had to build the light and all that stuff and beforehand. So quite I guess significant process to that. But I definitely would love to go visit that location. It literally looks like I'm into that kind of Pacific Northwest, even the Atlantic Northeast. I kind of like that vibe. And they have kind of similar vibes. And it's like I said, it's an iconic location. And I feel like since The Ring, and I know it popped up in like a Twilight Zone episode and I think like a couple other movies, I think. But I'm sure that since The Ring, it really increased the tourism to that area. And I mean, it's just a lighthouse, yeah, but it's got some significance, some iconicness. So that's just, one spot that I would like to visit. It's I think it's definitely not as significant as some other locations, or at least significant in the world of like horror or scary movies, but iconic nonetheless. So the next thing I have on my list is the house from the Amityville Horror. If you ever seen the Amityville Horror, it's a movie about a family that has moved into a home that was recently a place that was a murder that murder took place. Sorry, I'm like confusing myself. A family called the Lutz moved into a house that was the place for a murder, where this dude named something to DeFeo, I think was his name, killed his family and blamed it on his head had hearing like voices and like some paranormal thing or whatever. But the family, the Lutz family, bought the place and then less than a month later moved out because of all the spooky things that were going on in the house. And the house they used in the movie, I don't know if it was the actual house that the real story was based off of. I don't know. But the address is 112 Ocean Avenue. It's a Yellow Card song. But I know that they changed the address since then, and the house was kind of iconic, and it used to, one of the sides of the house looked like a spooked face, like the windows were like looked like eyes, and it just kind of looked like a spooked face, and so it kind of became iconic in that way. And if you ever seen the Amityville Horror, the movie is just fantastic. Whether it's if you watched like the original like 70s version or if you watched the Ryan Reynolds mid 2000 version, both movies are just as scary. And maybe at least for me, I enjoy a good like haunted house movie. A scary house with scary things going on, and the a tragic backstory that kind of has ingrained itself in the house or whatever. And it takes place in Long Island, New York, which is that Atlantic Northeast, which like I said, I love that area. And as a kid, I remember watching the Ryan Reynolds one, the remake. And I just thought about how that house looks so cool. And maybe maybe it's more so I just want to go live in like one of those style houses, one of those bay style houses, that's kind of popular in that area. Maybe it's just that. I just want to go visit that kind of house. But just thinking of like that movie and just thinking like the iconicness of that. It's super simple. Like I said, most of horror movies are known for characters, and that's kind of what you know the movie for. But you can't help but to like just think about some of these places. That's a quick one. So for the next one, for my third one, kind of right there in the middle of the list, I have uh, the woods from the Blair Witch Project. Now, it's just it could be any woods theoretically. Specifically, they use the Seneca Creek State Park, which is in Montgomery County, Maryland. And it opened up in 1958, the state park did. And I mean, theoretically, they could have probably filmed this movie in any woods, anything. But just made it that much more scary. And I'm pretty partial that there's some spookiness to the woods, the unknown, and that movie portrays that very much so. It's the very like found footage broken down. It's just a small group of people working together to film this, documentary about the story of the Blair Witch. And then obviously spookiness ensues. Sorry. I was confusing myself. Like I said, it could be any woods. It could just have been any woods, but it has then become kind of iconic, and a lot of people go looking for. They used to have the house that you see in the movie, but they tore it down because people were going to it and messing with it. Can't have nice things, I guess. But I would love to just go see. I would love to see the house, but it's not there anymore. But just see if I can recognize some things, some of the creeks they go into. And there's a river, the Potomac River is like a very big famous river, so maybe I just really want to go hiking. But it'd be kind of cool to see this place that I very much so remember from my childhood. And that movie, like it's iconic and being like kind of one of the very first, not the very first, I guess, but one of the biggest found footage movies to kind of ever happen. And it kind of started that whole franchise of, or that whole like genre of found footage movies. And it's just believable. And I think people can probably put themselves in the shoes of the people in that movie. You'd be kind of scared getting lost, and the idea that the woods is kind of what's playing a trick on you, that they're not necessarily really lost. It's the woods that that's kind of cursed, and anybody that tries to, as they get closer to the Blair Witch, the more confusion ensues. But like I said, it could be any forest, I suppose. But it's a beautiful place, and a great location, and I know this is something that was nearby where like all the people that were involved in the film, like it's nearby where they were located and stuff. And it also kind of shows you that you can kind of make a movie for no money almost. That you can kind of just, if you have an idea and if it's spooky enough, and especially when you play into like the idea of like a local legend, lore of some sort of, you can kind of play around with something just simple like that. And obviously that kind of iconic ending of they get into the house and the one dude's facing the corner. Gosh, that movie scares me. It's creepy and definitely 100% something that intrigued me to go exploring in like abandoned woods or just go deep in the woods as a kid. Just terrifying. All right, getting close to the end of the list. For this number four on the list, the second kind of best, most in my mind, the most iconic location is from Dawn of the Dead. Specifically the original one, the '70s one, and it's the mall in Dawn of the Dead. It's the Monroeville Mall in Pennsylvania, and the mall was built in 1969. And so I think the movie took place, it like was filmed maybe within 10 years afterwards or after the mall was built. And during the filming, they started filming right before like Christmas season. So they had to like shut down production once Christmas happened because all the busyness and the craziness of the holiday season. But they were shooting in after hours, and that's why like you don't see a lot of exterior shots with the mall. In the remake, you do, and you kind of get the sense, you get a grander scope of things. But, you know, in the original Dawn of the Dead, that kind of, recluseness of that mall and, being trapped and you kind of want to keep yourself out of sight of the outside world, it made it really spooky. And something that's like, every person that's ever thought about that scenario of being in a zombie apocalypse, it's like where do you go? Where's one of the first places you go? Do you go to like a Target or do you go to a Walmart or do you go to a mall? So it really played with that idea and was awesome. And Dawn of the Dead was the second in kind of the series of zombie movies that George Romero made. He did Night of the Living Dead was his first one, which is iconic in its own right, and there's an iconic location. The cemetery in that movie is very iconic. But and also it takes place in Pennsylvania. I think George Romero's a Pennsylvania dude. I think he's from Pennsylvania. But it's as simple as just the idea of a mall, right? And then eventually kind of having to escape the mall once the zombies come in, and you don't want to be stuck there forever. You don't want to be stranded there forever. But also just bringing together this kind of cast of characters and these random people. And you get a kind of a view of like what people would do, they kind of get to live these certain luxuries, have themselves these fashion shows and destroy things, and you play a little hockey in the mall, and it kind of was fun to explore that idea. And the remake was very iconic growing up for me. I very much so remember the remake more than the original, just because it came out as when I was a kid. But they made renovations to the mall in the early 2000s, so very much so changed the look of the mall. And they have a museum in the mall that's got like memorabilia from the movie, and you can take like a tour. I still think you could take like a tour in like some of the back rooms, like the boiler room and stuff like that, that was featured in the movie. And I read that they relocated the museum to Evans City, which is where Night of the Living Dead is filmed and where the cemetery is. But then they moved it back. So I guess whatever, just think it's funny. But somewhere I'd still love to go. I would love to go see that. I would love to go see the mall, and I know it looks a lot different, but it's just more so being in the realm of where that movie was filmed. Very iconic movie for me. Something that it's like I said, it's just the idea of like it's just like it's kind of a mundane idea in a way that everybody just trapped in a mall, but very realistic in how the people act and how people interact with each other. And think go and see the museum. I'd like to go see some memorabilia. Yeah, I'd love to go see that stuff. I was gonna say a bad word, but I stopped myself. All right, so last on the list, maybe the most iconic horror movie location, maybe. You can argue, but it's The Shining. It's the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Very beautiful hotel. When you look at like the outside and all those beautiful outside shots in the movie, kind of this big, long, building and the slanted roofs and the wooden features and the stone entrance, and it's just a beautiful looking place and very much so. It's a real place. It's a place called Timberline Lodge, in Oregon, in Mount Hood, Oregon. All these places in either like I said, the northwest, northwest or the northeast. Um, Opened in 1937. It has the longest ski season because it's open all year round. You can ski all year round. But this is a location that Stanley Kubrick found and like took a lot of scouting. It had to be kind of just as much of a character as the characters in the movie. It's I love The Shining. It's when you read the book, it's a little different than the movie. The book is a little more like fantastical. It's a little more supernatural. Kind of delves into the powers of The Shining a little more, but then when you um watch the movie, it kind of goes for more scares. But still, just this idea of this family moving into this hotel and being the caretakers to this hotel, and kind of that idea of even cabin fever, even though there is a paranormal supernatural force that goes on, but it's kind of this idea that it's everybody kind of going insane a little bit, at least Jack Torrance or Jack Nicholson playing Jack Torrance, but also just great kid acting, and the kid that played Danny, and Shelley Duvall. I think she's absolutely fantastic. And when you read a little bit behind the scenes and you find out about, kind of what that movie took out of her and kind of how it affected her, it's sad to hear. But then you look at the movie and you see that performance, and you're just amazed by it. But Stephen King wrote the book about kind of based about another hotel. He was staying at a hotel called the Stanley Hotel, which is in Estes Park, Colorado. Which was the hotel was also used in the movie Dumb and Dumber, which is so funny when they go to Aspen. But that's where he was staying when he said when he wrote the book and he had his paranormal experiences. And so a lot of people get to kind of get that confused a little bit. But where the movie was shot, in the one in the movie, that Overlook Hotel is the Timberline Lodge. And I w- I love that when we got the movie Doctor Sleep, that we kind of got a re-rendition of The Shining a little bit, at least the ending act. Like I said, The Shining is supposed to be a little more supernatural and fantastical and stuff, and it, Stanley Kubrick just didn't do that. He just kind of went for the scares and very much so succeeded. And it's just a beautiful movie to watch. It literally, even the set pieces inside, I think were built by Stanley kind of separately. I don't know if they actually look like the actual interior or not, but nonetheless, there was a vision and they succeeded. And I think like was always a scary idea to think about being trapped inside a place for months on end. I lived in Minnesota I mean, was born there and spent the first few of my life there, first few years of my life there. But I did move back a few years ago and moved back during the winter. And that isolation was hell. So I can't even imagine something else. Also, just maybe even cool to think about being in that big space and just wander around doing your thing. But yeah, I wanted to just talk about a few iconic locations. There's so many more, but these are the ones that kind of stick out in my mind. And I know for future episodes, I could talk about some more iconic locations. And what do y'all think? What are some iconic locations to you? And what are some of y'all favorite horror movies? But yeah, anyways, let's transition to the next topic. So let's talk a little bit about the afterlife, or maybe the idea of what happens after death. Where do we go? What's the experience? Is it blank, or is there somewhere that we do happen to go? It's kind of hard to think that after we leave this beautiful earth and leave this physical world that it's just gone forever, that we have no visual and no feeling. So, what's the idea of the afterlife? What is it like? What happens? I like to think that maybe there is something that there is somewhere that we do go. There is a heaven or a hell, even though that's tough to think about. But just to think about it being blank is even tougher. To think that it just all ends and you don't feel anything, you don't experience anything is quite crazy. I know that it's even harder to think about the time when we will die. And even just thinking about that is hard to comprehend. So to think about what happens once that happens, what happens after that is even more difficult. I think it could be affected even by your spiritualism, maybe your religious beliefs, right? You want to believe there is a heaven, and that you hopefully will get there by being a godly person and being who you are, and that you don't end up in the worst place, which is hell, right? I think there's just so much in life that we experience, and whether it's good and whether it's bad, it's just crazy to think that it just goes away. So that's why I like to believe that maybe something does happen. At least with the people that we experience things with, and maybe we get to relive great moments in our life. That'd be an ideal situation. Think about the idea of this euphoric place like a heaven would be great. A place where you can just live happy forever. You can be with the people that passed away in your life, and eventually, more people in your family will come along, and you can just live in this kind of happy place forever. And I like to sometimes put that in my head to think that that is a possibility, not just based on you being a religious person or something like that, or being a spiritual person or something like that. Maybe it just is a place that does exist, even in the sense of that relief from the pain in life. Then it's tough to think that if there is a heaven, maybe there is a hell. That unfortunately you've made enough mistakes in your life, or you've openly made those mistakes, that there's a place waiting for you. And you may not expect to go to that kind of place, but think it'd be the opposite of what heaven is, right? This dysphoric thing, this terrible place, and you had to suffer and experience the bad parts in your life, and maybe you live eternity with the people you hate the most. Or the idea of purgatory. What would like purgatory kind of be? Kind of be like a place of, maybe it's the in between of passing on, right? So you have a purpose still left. Maybe that's kind of what purgatory is. It's you're still worth of something on this earth. And you may not be here physically, but you still have to do something. You still have people to help because, people will miss you and people will have to grieve, and maybe before you can fully move on, you kind of have to somehow help them with that grieving in the afterlife, in whatever that may be. Like I said, it's really crazy to think that everything would just be gone. our brains are so active, and it feels like so much goes on inside our heads that even with just imagination that you just don't get to experience that. All the all the good things and all the bad things. So maybe it's like once you die, it's blank for like a little bit, but then you do move on. And maybe the afterlife isn't actually like a place like heaven or hell or purgatory. Maybe you are reincarnated. That's kind of a crazy thing to think about. I love to try to think about reincarnation. I like to think about that maybe we do get another chance to come back. And maybe that's just kind of the thing is that we're cycling constantly, that as we pass, we move on. Maybe no particular timeline. Maybe it's not an instant moving on, but maybe you just get your chance to. Maybe you do move on to like a greater place and whatever that may be, and then you get your chance. It's a thing to think that like as you work in life for things that you kind of have to work for things in the afterlife, your place in the afterlife. But reincarnation would be a fun thing to put my belief in. Ah, I don't know how, obviously, there's no proof to it, but you do sometimes hear stories about people having these strong feelings of like deja vu or like kids who say they're this person from this different time or whatever. Like, I remember when I was a kid or a little, I don't remember how young I was, but there was a story that was kind of big in the news on this kid who thought he was like the reincarnation of Lou Gehrig. And so that kind of always made me think, like, what if, I may not be the reincarnation of some great athlete or person from the past, but who was I before? And who will I be after? Even if you come back as like a person, maybe you come back as a bird, an animal of any sort, come back as a living plant or something like that, a tree. On the opposite end of like reincarnation, like I said, it's just weird to think that nothing happens. So reincarnation is where I want to set my belief sometimes. I definitely want to experience a heaven, hell, purgatory situation like Dante's Inferno, even though that's the depiction of hell. I don't want to go through the layers of hell. And I know that the man that wrote Dante's Inferno is whatever his name is, Dante Alighieri or whatever, something like that. I'm sorry, I butchered that for sure. But he also wrote like about purgatory and heaven. But like I said, it's kind of interesting to think about maybe you have to ascend through these different levels to reach different parts. To maybe even moving on is through heaven and hell and purgatory. That then it's this blissful relief and you kind of just go through all this work and all this suffering or all this whatever to then just have ultimate relief. That's a thing to think about too. But hopefully that even when you're gone and you're wherever you are, that you're never forgotten. You're obviously going to be missed by people, hopefully, and hopefully you'll have people that will always remember you. And even kind of a thing about maybe you live forever. Something I've talked about like in my last episode that maybe that even when you're in an afterlife and you're not here physically, that you're always going to be around. That the afterlife is kind of more based on how people remember you, how long they remember you. People continue in your legacy. Like Coco, like the movie Coco. It's like they're in this place and they're there as long as people remember them. And it's fortunate for some people and not so fortunate for others. And so hopefully that and you obviously wouldn't know if you'd be gone, so you wouldn't know, but hopefully that you've done enough in life that there is a good remembrance of you and that people will remember you forever and or as long as they can. I don't know. I don't remember people from my family from 200, 300, 400 years ago, but obviously maybe one day I'll see them again if that's what happens in the afterlife. Yeah, maybe they're all waiting for me. They're all there to say hi and welcome me to this beautiful place. And maybe no matter if you're a good person, bad person, you know some things in your life that you just go to a better place nonetheless. What do y'all think? Where do y'all think we end up? Like I said, it's kind of hard to think that it just would be blank, but that could be the realistic thing. And some of us maybe think about dying earlier than others. Maybe it is a point to eventually relieve or reach a place of relief. And I understand that. We don't want to suffer, and life is not always meant for suffering, but it makes it beautiful when we don't have to. And so that does make it kind of a fun thing to think, or a nice thing to think that maybe after we're done on this earth and we've gone through everything we can and we've given ourselves to everything that we get to have some peace. But yeah, let's move on to the next topic. All right, let's talk about nightmares. Spooky. Every night when we go to sleep, we hope to sleep at least a few hours or however many hours you can. But sometimes we get disrupted. We have dreams or we have nightmares. And nightmares always feel a little more like they stick out. They're a little scarier or a little more spooky, maybe a little more random. But why do we have nightmares? What's the difference between nightmares and dreams? Are they kind of the same thing? And do they inspire you in creativity? And do they have similar effects in life? I don't think I could really tell you why a nightmare is a nightmare and why a dream is a dream. It's that very much so that same place inside your mind that you drift off to. Your mind is so active, even in your sleep, that these chemicals kind of flood in, and even like in like psychedelic experiences and hallucinogens and stuff like that, that your brain still kind of experiences that even when you're sleeping. So, I mean, I was always told that the reason I have nightmares is because I was watching TV before bed and I had too much sugar before bed. That's what my mom and my grandparents used to tell me. But but I can't tell you necessarily why specifically nightmares. Inevitably, whether it's a nightmare or a dream, it's always something that feels relevant to your life, something that you've been thinking about in more intermediate time and or something that you've probably maybe even experienced in that more intermediate time. It often reflects the things that you're going through. And we can't help to be sometimes thinking, overthinking, and some days are better than others. So you're kind of just cycling through thoughts through your mind through the whole day. And inevitably, before you go to bed, you're still on that line. And it might feed into when you eventually go to sleep. Just as good thoughts might feed into dreams, bad thoughts might feed into the nightmares. It's always kind of a thing to think that it's also could be just like a response to life, that you kind of were worried about failing a test at school, so you end up having a nightmare about the school. Or your boss got mad at you at work, so you end up having like a nightmare about being at work. Or something even a little more traumatic than that. I've I can't really speak too much on how trauma affects people. I know that I've had certain emotional trauma and it feels like a lot more it's been brought on by myself, really. It's like self-harming myself, but in the times that I've felt most negative and it feels like I'm having my worst days or whatever and I'm feeling most uneasy, it affects the way that I dream. It affects the nightmares that I have, affects the sleep in general. And I can try to think about, well, sometimes it's just nothing. It's not necessarily anything going on, but as it can be also a response to you, a response to something that's going on in your life. It could be even a foretelling of things to come. That's also something that that maybe happens with your dreams and happens with nightmares is that it's trying to tell you something. And maybe when it's a reoccurring thing, that there's something in your life that's reoccurring as well. And this nightmare is a direct response. And the the things that happen in your dream may not be so straightforward, right? Where it's like, hey, this is happening, figure it out. It's scary. So here you go. Dreams and nightmares aren't always easy to interpret, but that uncomfortability might be just a direct response to the uncomfortability you're feeling in life. Maybe even spookier, it's maybe like a deja vu thing, right? And not even a deja vu to your personal life where you can directly hand it something, but to a past life, you know? Like what I'm talking about reincarnation or whatever is the idea that you just kind of keep coming back and maybe you don't forget everything. And maybe sometimes even in your dreams and nightmares that you remember those past events. That's kind of spooky. Or to think that maybe it's a premonition, uh, a foretelling, a fortune telling, a foreshadowing, more so. Sorry, I was trying to look for the word, but just like a foreshadow for something to happen. I've had a couple spooky dreams like that where it was kind of like I saw a house in my dream, and it's always something small, it feels like, where it's a house or you see some random person and you kind of see a similar person or a similar house or whatever it may be. But I try not to delve deep into the dreams. I try to think of my dreams as just things my mind's doing, a trick my mind's playing on me, or the same thing with nightmares, just something my brain's making up on its own. And maybe if my life is a little more easy and if I don't feel so intrusive in my thoughts and I'm not so much of an overthinker, that maybe that does help me with not having nightmares and having more dreams, experiencing those better things. Because when you have a bad dream when you're sleeping, it could affect yourself very seriously, make you be scared to go to sleep. And then, you don't sleep and you're tired in life and even like you're overanalyzing the dream. It has these real effects in life. I experience sleep anxiety all the time. It's kind of like I don't want to have like a bad dream, so it kind of scares me to go to sleep, which is weird. I shouldn't deprive myself of sleep because then, I get tired and it makes me, not in the right mind space. And then I start to overthink about things and it just doesn't set your body up. So it's very real to think that maybe it does affect you in that way. Or, like I said, you start to kind of overthink that, oh, maybe because this happened in my nightmare or this happened in my dream, that it's trying to tell me something. As much as it could be a random thing, it could be a very much so it's trying to tell you something. Your brain's smart. Your brain has a way of letting you know things. Your body know things. So in your sleep, whether you're awake, it could just be a response. And sometimes you get those dreams that are just not that scary. It feels like, or like nightmares that are not that scary, where it feels just like more random. Just kind of feels like things are happening and if you have some fluidity, which is nice, then you can kind of take control of your dream, right? And you can kind of like bounce out of situations. And if something gets too real, you can kind of take control. That's a nice thing is having that fluidity in dreams and nightmares. And also, thinking of it in a good way, maybe it inspires some sort of creativity. Just as kind of like dreams inspire a lot of people and they have dreams of success or have dreams of things, that nightmares might do the same sort of thing. Might inspire you to change your life or inspire your creativity. It might inspire you to write a story or make a movie. I've had some spooky things happen and I don't know if I could film a movie about it, but it'd be a spooky movie, I'm sure. I just don't know how to translate it onto a camera. scary artwork, you know? Your mind, like I said, it's the imagination. Your mind's so active that why not in your sleep? Why wouldn't your imagination roam in your sleep just as much? So, as it could be a scary thing, it could be a great thing. It could really push you and make you think differently, inspire you, and maybe not inspire you. I've had one reoccurring dream that I had from a pretty young age, all the way up until I was about like 12. The dream would always start with me sitting in a two-story house. I'd be sitting up, looking out a window in a chair, and I would look to my right, and sitting to my right would be a kid dressed in a cowboy costume, and he would always give me a grin, and I would then look back forward out the window, and as I would look forward, I'd get pushed right out this window, and I'd fall 2 stories down into a puddle of mud every single time, and I would get up and I would like wipe the mud off and I'd get up on like my knees and as soon as I'd get on my knees, I'd hear like a door swing open, like a screen door or like a back door or whatever. And that would give me like a cue to run. And I'd always end up in this backyard that was lined with a white fence and inside of the white fence was lined with a hedge, like hedges, and I'd take off towards the hedges and there'd be like perfect opening for me to run into. And so I'd go flying into this opening and I'd end up in this opening and I'd end up in the hedges and I'd start walking through the hedges. And I could see like a blur of him like running in the backyard looking for me, but he couldn't find me. And I'd start making my way through the hedges and inevitably, I'd get to a point where there'd be like another opening. And as soon as I'd get up to that opening, he'd pop up in front of me. But without a head. And then I'd wake up and I'd be scared. And I had that a lot. And I don't know if it was a response to anything in my life or whatever, but more so my imagination wandering. And around like 12 years old was like the last time I had it. I was literally having the dream, and when it got to that point when he would pop up without a head, I remember I literally, instead of waking up being scared, I grabbed him and I like came out the hedges and I had him in the air like a cartoon kind of like bull, like and there was a seesaw in this imaginary backyard and I would grab him and he would have a head all of a sudden, miraculously have a head. And I would stick him down underneath the seesaw and I would stomp on the seesaw and his head would go and then I'd wake up. And or then I woke up because that was the last time I ever had that dream and I haven't had it since and pretty happy I haven't had it since. But just as easy it is to have a dream, you can have a nightmare. And I don't know what makes a nightmare or what makes a dream, but nonetheless, I think it can affect you just as equally. And hopefully that you never try to dive too deeply. That sometimes maybe it's just a random thing, but very realistically, it could be a response to your life. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say on nightmares. Let's move on to the next topic. All right. Lastly, I wanted to talk about remaking horror movies. Specifically, I wanted to talk about maybe a few horror movies that I wanted to remake specifically, three of them specifically. I really don't mind remakes. I tend to enjoy remakes, and some are bad, but I think most are good. And I kind of try to have it under the idea that it kind of brings a new interest into a new audience. And as long as the remake is not trying to make itself like a definitive version and it's not like trying to say, hey, this is the version of the movie you should watch, then everything's good. And it often, when I have watched remakes, that it has made me curious about watching the original, if I haven't already. There's a lot of movies and horrors too that I didn't know were remakes and stuff like that. And so I watch these remakes and I find out, and often it makes me want to watch the original one. And it feels like there is always the line of sometimes some remakes are pretty random. some remakes of not just horror movies, but of films in general that they're like movies that people haven't thought of in forever in a good way. You know, that we don't need to think about these movies. And maybe they're just so random that even if it's like the same title as an old movie, that it's not even the same movie. That kind of gives the question of, do you make it super direct of a remake or do you not? And especially when it comes to classic remakes that you don't theoretically want too much to change, but then what happens when you get kind of like a direct shot for shot remake? Then it kind of feels like you're just copying the original. So in I know a lot of people in my life that just don't want the classics remade, and I think I feel that way a lot of times. There are a lot of movies that I just don't think could be touched, right? That could be remade or whatever, but who am I to say? And until a remake happens, I may never know that I needed it or not. And I think of some, I'm trying to talk about more so remakes of horror movies, and that's a pretty classic thing. Especially like in my growing up in my generation, the early 2000s and mid 2000s were filled with reboots, new sequels, remakes, just all that stuff with horror movies. I got to witness a lot of them. Some of the better ones, I feel like, one specifically when I was a kid was Dawn of the Dead. That was a movie that I didn't know was a remake. As I was growing up, it was made in 2004, the remake, and the original one was in 1978. I was 9 years or 8 years old when the remake came out, so I just would have never known. I wasn't into movies like that. But I thought that movie was great. It's a zombie movie. And then it made me want to watch the original one. And then watching the original one, it's awesome. Both of them are great, and I think you should watch the original one first. Both of them are great. And it didn't really change anything. It just brought it into the modern generation. Another one that came out like almost 10 years after that was the Evil Dead remake. That came out in like when I was in high school, right at the end of high school. And the original Evil Dead is crazy. It's a great movie. I had watched it before the remake, so I knew what the Evil Dead was about. I knew it was kind of psycho and scary and graphic at times. So when the remake was happening, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if it's going to be a good remake. Then you watch it, and it's bloody and very scary, very eerie, and it just does it way better. And and I don't want to say way better. I was gonna say that maybe I like the remake more than the original, but I'm still a little iffy on that. I love the remake of Evil Dead. And in recent years, a very popular remake is the It remake. I think some of us as a kids can maybe remember the miniseries. It came out in 1990, so a little bit before when I was born, but Tim Curry very much so remembered as Pennywise, one of the very many parts. And so when they remade it and just all these new technologies and all these new visuals they can create, the new It movies are incredible, absolutely scary. They make Pennywise seem genuinely the most terrifying thing in the world. And I think that's a good thing. And obviously you got to love the cast of people just as much as they were beloved in the miniseries, the kids and the adults. It's the same way with the new It movies. And so those are really great remakes. Those are great remakes of horrors that I can hang my head on and say I can watch these confidently. But then inevitably, I got to think of some bad horror remakes. When Rob Zombie made his Halloween, the two Halloween movies that he made, that hurt my heart. I love Halloween. Halloween's my favorite horror movie of all time. The original Halloween is the best. And he remade both. He made literally the first and second Halloweens. His Halloweens were just remakes of the first two. And, he Rob Zombied it up. He made it more intense and bloodier and just wore just like edgy, and it was good for him. And I think it's not terrible necessarily in the grand scheme of things, but it's not the original. And it changed too much and it made it too much. The original Halloween was a basic slasher and slower paced and Rob Zombie just brought it to the modern era, and too much so. And then I remember a few years after that, in 2010, Nightmare on Elm Street. That remake was awful. It holds a kind of a special place in my heart because I like Jackie Earl Haley as Freddy Krueger. I think he was fantastic. But the original one, 1984, Robert Englund, the original Freddy Krueger, nobody's gonna beat that. He was great. He was spooky, and sometimes was kind of parodish. You know, it was a little bit of a parody of himself in some movies, but it's way better. And that's another thing where they changed too much, and they kind of made Freddy Krueger a little more gross of a human than he was in the original one, and it's whatever. It's just wasn't good. And the cast was boring, and it's almost like you kind of root for them to get killed. And then a few years after that, there was the Carrie remake, which came out the same year as the Evil Dead remake, 2013. And if you ever watched the original Carrie, it's very eerie. You know, it's very much so you get the sense of this outcast girl who is confused about the things that are happening to her, and you know, she's been sheltered so she doesn't know what's going on, and she gets taken advantage of, and unfortunately lets it out on not only the people at her high school but then the whole town. Dude. And the remake, you know, Chloe Grace Moretz did fine, but it just wasn't. She's just not as believable as like Sissy Spacek. You don't believe that she's getting like bullied and that she's this helpless girl like Sissy Spacek was. And I think people don't even really maybe remember the original Carrie too much, and so that remake kind of think that one kind of became a definitive version almost. But it's okay to sometimes make bad remakes, even though we're just not asking for them. I know that people are trying, and you hope that people have the right intentions, and it's not just like a cash grab thing. But it kind of got me thinking about. I was thinking about some good remakes and bad remakes, and I was thinking about some horror movies that I kind of wanted to remake myself, or maybe even a way, not necessarily remake, but like make a new sequel to, or redo even like kind of thing. So I got three. The first one I have on my list is a movie that I don't think anybody remembers, and that was Vacancy. It came out like late 2000s, I think. It was right about that time. It had Kate Beckinsale and Luke Wilson, and they're like a couple that is coming back from like a party. The car breaks down, and they end up staying in a motel. And the motel is the owner of the motel is crazy, or the manager is crazy. And basically, they get like chased by two masked dudes, and they find a bunch of like VHS tapes that are like snuff films, basically, or not basically, they are. And so, but it's the idea of this random motel in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't want to stay there because their car broke down, so they didn't have any intentions of staying there. And of course, that would happen. Kind of feeds into that spooky, you know, off the beaten path, off the main road type vibe. And I love that movie. I thought it was spooky, and that always made me a little bit like scared of like small motels and stuff like that. And just thinking about that. So that's a movie that I think I can kind of like redo. The movie is fine. It just sometimes I think it was a little like underdone. And nothing against Luke Wilson or Kate Beckinsale, but maybe it just wasn't they weren't good for that. Um but the idea of that creepy manager you would still want. So if I was gonna redo it, I might just make it like without their car breaking down, and maybe it's like they're cross country traveling, you know, especially like nowadays the van life thing is very popular, right? You know, people, you know, traveling across country like that. So maybe it'd be like a couple that, you know, wants to just stay at a motel for the night just for whatever reason. You know, they're trying to experience small time America, so oh, there's this cute motel that oh, we should stay here. Oh, it's not marked on the map, so oh, we should go check it out. You know, everything that's kind of cliche in horror. You know, don't investigate the spooky place. If there's nobody around, that must mean there's a bad thing. But also thinking that maybe that this motel is abandoned and it only looks like it's active because there's a couple cars parked out, but it's really like people who are using it as like a front for something deeper. like a front for human trafficking or drug trafficking. And that's even scarier. That maybe even it was taken over from like original owners, that these kind of crazy people escape from like a local insane asylum and they come in, like take over the motel, and they front, and anybody that comes, any poor, bastard that comes through ends up getting killed or sold off. That makes it twisted. I think that the original movie did really good in the idea that it is kind of this like beacon for terror, this beacon for suffering. And I like the in the movie there's like a series of there's tunnels that go throughout the motel that and like hidden cameras. So I do kind of like that. I like the idea of someone always kind of watching, that someone knows what you're doing at every moment. So, this couple, comes in because they want to stay at this cute little motel, and they get into this room, and originally in the movie Vacancy, the original Vacancy, it starts off with like loud banging on the doors. That kind of starts everything off and gets them like on edge. So maybe like when the couple gets there, there's already like another car there, and they see someone else checking in. So it kind of makes you not so conspicuous. Sorry. So then you're kind of like the guards down, but then maybe like that night they hear screaming from another room. They like open the room and like someone runs out, and like they take them into their room, and then all of a sudden it's like three people kind of fighting for their lives against these crazy people that took over the motel. That's probably maybe something I would do. It's such a simple idea that like even like I don't have to name a vacancy. I could just make an idea about a scary motel that's like that. But that was just a movie that kind of popped up in my head that was good and might get a remake. It might. It's just like I said, it's an idea that's played on a lot, is the haunted place, the abandoned place, the off the beaten path kind of area. Like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this house in the middle of nowhere, or like the gas station that they stop at first that has all those people kind of staring them down. But that's kind of what I had first on the list. Secondly, I had a movie that I learned about when I was kind of like I just out of high school. I got interested in looking up old Universal monsters, the whole universe, dark universe, Universal Studios. So Universal monsters are something that I've always had interest in, and I always talk about how I think that we need like a revamping of monster movies. I think that's like something that we've kind of lost is monster movies. And so I was looking through some movies, and I've always been interested in that. But one movie that's stuck in the back of my head is a movie called House of Horrors, and that movie's about it's about a sculptor who's pressed and he's struggling and he wants to kill himself. But when he goes to kill himself, he notices that there's someone drowning in like a body of water, like a lake nearby him. And so instead of killing himself, he goes and saves this person. And the person he saves happens to be it describe him as like a madman. He's basically a monster. They call him the Creeper. Just a very fortunate name. But he like brings him back to health and takes care of him, and then decides that he's so interested in how this guy looks that he's gonna make him the subject of his next sculpture. And so he sculpts a head bust of him, and it ends up being bashed by critics, and he just goes back into being a struggling sculptor. But this time around, he's not depressed. He's angry. So he tells the creeper, like, hey, I saved your life, so I need you to go kill these people for me. And the creeper does it. But it like heightens the suspicion of like a reporter chick who becomes suspicious of this sculptor. And she like gets invited to his house, and she does some snooping and finds like stuff that the creeper is like there and all this stuff. And so the sculptor gets suspicious of her because the reporter's going to rat him out. So he wants the creeper to go kill her, but the creeper doesn't want to kill the reporter. Um, but then the sculptor's like, hey, if you don't kill the reporter, I'm going to turn you in because you killed all these other critics. So then the creeper just kills the sculptor and then gets shot by police. So an unfortunate ending, but very much so what monster movies were like. It's the mob gets you in the end type thing. But it's a classic Universal monster movie. It's a classic horror. And so it kind of got me thinking that maybe it's just time to bring it's one of those things, one of those classics where maybe we just need to bring it into the light, bring it into the modern day. And I probably wouldn't change too much of it. I kind of like the idea of it may be a little weird, but like why would then this creeper be so enamored or so, do anything for this sculptor? Well, it's because he saved his life. But also then to think the sculptor goes from being depressed and about to kill himself to then being like psycho and angry. Kind of an interesting dynamic, a quick dynamic to shift to. But I kind of like just keeping that idea of a struggling artist who maybe saves someone's life, or it's maybe the idea of kind of something like that, or maybe someone saves the sculptor's life and they make the sculptor enact their, criminal activities. Doesn't have to be killing people necessarily, but you know? And so I think I just would want to remake it and bring it to the light. Just thinking about like sculpting isn't as relevant maybe, but like I said, maybe switch it on its head. The artist is the one it actually kills himself or tries to, and the creeper or the madman is the one that comes in and brings it back to life. And the sculptor is in this weird place where it's like, well, I know that you're this crazy person, and I know that you're this outcast, but I do have some sort of indebtedness to you. So, what do I owe you? I'm struggling. I need money. And so maybe the person's like, well, I'll give you this much money if you go and kill this person. So maybe it's kind of like that. And then obviously the suspicion arises. Maybe it's like the brother of the artist or the sculptor or something like that. Or the brother of like the madman, the creeper in this sense. And they're like trying to convince them, hey, you don't need to do this. Like, it's only going to end badly for you. More people are going to suspicion. But then they're like, well, but this is the only way I can make, I've struggled for so long as an artist that this money's coming in too easy type thing. Maybe inevitably ending in the same kind of ending. That same, shot by police. This maybe switch of fortunes where it's like, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore for you. I'm going to take it on you. Maybe even proving that they're behind all the crimes and they were forcing this artist in their lowest moment to do something. So, like I said, I don't even think I would maybe just stick to the original idea. I would just want to bring a classic movie to light again. Something that like I said sometimes is very cool to see. And I want to see the whole Universal Dark Universe come back. All those monster movies, I would love to see them come back. I'll write those movies. Someone hire me. Someone put it out there. I'll write the movies. I can do it. I'll direct those movies. I can do it easily. All right, we'll talk about one more. This one kind of hits close from home for me, not only because it was a movie that I liked as a kid, but it was also a video game that I liked as a kid. And Silent Hill. Now, with the Silent Hill thing, because there's like multiple games and multiple movies based about Silent Hill, is that theoretically I'm not going to make like a remake. I don't want to redo any of the stories. Silent Hill is a place that kind of sits in this it's this otherworld realm type place. It's this town that's a ghost town. So it's a setting. So I would just make like a sequel. And most of the movies or the games all play on the idea of someone getting lost in the town and someone searching for them in a town and coming across all these crazy creepy people and ghosts, and they inevitably see an apparition of like a girl, and they'll find out that this girl was used as like a sacrifice for this pagan cult that like occupies the town. And that's literally like mostly the reoccurring themes is the foggy town and the pagan cult and the worship of some deity. And a couple characters like Pyramid Head, this big dude with like a big pyramid like mask over him. But very scary and always takes place Silent Hill always takes place in it's a northeast, like Massachusetts kind of area. But it's just always been felt like it's other world, that when you're there that it's this other place. And I remember when the first movie came out, it's kind of the afterlife for them because it's a mother and her adopted daughter, and she's trying to find out what her adopted daughter keeps sleepwalking and has these like nightmares, and it brings her to Silent Hill. But they get in a car accident, and it turns out this car accident was fatal. But nonetheless, they still, suffer through the misfortunes of Silent Hill and find out about this deviousness about the cults and stuff like that. And so, still the idea of maybe like I said, I would just do a sequel because Silent Hill is now kind of just a place where this stuff can happen. Like Twin Peaks, like all this weird stuff happens specifically at Twin Peaks because it's kind of like a beacon for weird things. Feels like this is like the one place where it happens. So Silent Hill is like this place where it seems like just scary things happen, that this maybe cult that occupies this town constantly brings in this nefarious threats, these lost souls in a way. Because I would try to play on that idea. Still, you have to play on the idea of someone being lost, right? But then if it's too many people, then it gets too jumbled. I don't want a group of people being lost. What made Silent Hill so scary is that you were always one person navigating this spooky place by yourself and trying to figure out the mysteries of Silent Hill. And so I'd still play on that. I'd maybe play on like kind of like in Vacancy where it's like, you know, someone going on vacation trying to find like just a little towns in America, and they come across Silent Hill and they say, "Hey, we'll stay here." And maybe they end up, staying there, and they like meet a couple weird characters, and they start to kind of discover more, and maybe they get like kidnapped, and they're like forced in, maybe like the person happens to be a resemblance to former leader or something like that, or a former like sacrifice that they had or something, that then they like kidnap them because they want to worship to them, but this person's just like, I don't know who you are, I don't know what's happening. But maybe there's like some sort of beacon that called, like I said, it's like Silent Hill's a beacon for things to happen, for things to come. That's why it wouldn't be a remake, it'd be a sequel. It would just be another reimagining of Silent Hill. And I'd highly recommend people going and playing those games. I mean, the Silent Hill games are fantastic. They kind of started that whole survival horror genre. Resident Evil was originally, the first Resident Evil game was originally a Silent Hill make. It was supposed to be a Silent Hill game, but then they just made a Resident Evil. So I wouldn't want to change. It's with all these movies, I wouldn't want to change too much of the idea because the ideas are really good. It's just maybe reimagining them, or just making like another sequel to it, or bringing it to the light and just not necessarily changing anything about it. But there are plenty of movies that I know that I'd remake. There are plenty of like classic horror movies that I kind of lick my lips to think that I would love to do, but there's some things that are untouchable. There's some things that probably will never get a remake and don't deserve to ever have a remake. We should just leave them classics, and or leave them in the cult classic that they are. But I know some of y'all would like some remakes. I know some of y'all have some ideas, and I would love to future episodes talk about some remakes of not just horror movies but other movies. But yeah, remaking horror movies. Transition. All right, friends. That's really all I have to say about that. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate the chance to get up on the microphone and talk to y'all. If you want to listen to this episode or any of my episodes, they will always be up on Spotify or YouTube under the Odd Thoughts podcast. If you find it enjoyable or relatable, I appreciated it. I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast. Also, you can follow me on all my social medias. I have a Facebook, which is Gunther Getlicker, which is my name. Both those G's are uppercase. I have an Instagram, which goes by Gunther underscore Getlicker, which both those G's are lowercase. And then I have a Twitter, which is at OneMikeGG. Both those G's are uppercase. I appreciate everyone. I love y'all. just remember to show up for yourselves every single day and be excellent to each other.